The thunderous crack of his hand against her cheek echoed through the modest farmhouse like a gunshot. Fiona Blackett stumbled backward, knocking over the washbasin, soapy water spilling across the wooden floor. Her left eye was already swelling shut, the bitter taste of blood filling her mouth from where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. This wasn't the first time Gerald had struck her, but as she steadied herself against the kitchen table, something inside her finally broke. "You're worthless," Gerald snarled, his face contorted with rage, breath heavy with whiskey though the sun had barely risen. "Can't keep a home, can't give me children, can't do a damned thing right." Fiona said nothing. 6 years of marriage had taught her that words only fueled his anger. Instead, she watched him storm out to the fields, the screen door slamming behind him. Her hands trembled as she touched her throbbing cheek, the reality of her life suddenly unbearable in the morning light of 1876. While Gerald worked their failing wheat crop, Fiona moved with quiet determination. She gathered her few possessions, a dress, a shawl, her mother's tarnished silver hairbrush, and the small leather pouch containing $17 she'd secretly saved from selling eggs. She couldn't take the horse. Gerald would notice too quickly. Her only chance was to walk to the nearest town, Cottonwood Springs, 15 miles east. When the bundle was tied, she penned a single line on a scrap of paper. "I won't be coming back." She placed her wedding ring atop the note, turned her back on 6 years of misery, and stepped out into the vastness of the Montana Territory. The sun beat down mercilessly as Fiona walked along the dusty road. Each step carried her further from her prison, yet the freedom felt terrifying. At 24, she had no family left, no trade beyond keeping house, and nowhere to go. But even that uncertain future seemed preferable to another day under Gerald's roof. By midday, her throat was parched, her feet blistered inside her worn boots. In the distance, a plume of dust signaled an approaching rider. Fiona tensed, stepping off the road. If Gerald had discovered her absence already and come looking, she would rather die than return. But it wasn't Gerald who emerged from the dust cloud. The rider was a stranger, a tall man atop a dappled gray horse. He slowed as he approached, tipping his hat to reveal sun-weathered features and eyes the color of the summer sky. "Madam," he said, his voice deep but gentle, "you're a fair distance from anywhere out here." His gaze lingered on her swollen face, but he asked no questions about it. "I'm headed to Cottonwood Springs," Fiona replied, shielding her eyes from the sun. "That's still 10 miles yonder," he said, glancing at her small bundle and clearly taking in her situation with a single sweep. "I'm riding that way myself. My name's Ross O'Malley." "Fiona Blackett," she answered, hesitating. A woman alone accepting rides from strange men was asking for trouble, yet something in his steady gaze made her want to trust him. "Mrs. Blackett, I don't mean to presume, but you look like you could use a friend right about now." He dismounted with fluid grace, leading his horse closer. "I've got water and some jerky if you're hungry." Fiona's pride warred with her thirst and exhaustion. "I can pay you for the ride, Mr. O'Malley," she said, lifting her chin despite the pain it caused. A small smile crossed his face. "No need for payment, just helping a neighbor." He offered her the canteen, then added softly, "And I reckon whoever put that mark on your face isn't a neighbor I care to know." Fiona took a long drink of water, weighing her options. The thought of walking another 10 miles was daunting, and this cowboy, seemed genuinely concerned. "I've left my husband," she admitted finally. "I'm not going back." Ross nodded solemnly. "Don't blame you one bit, madam," he gestured to his horse. "Ajax here is strong enough to carry us both to town if you're willing." With surprising gentleness for his large frame, Ross helped Fiona mount the horse before swinging up behind her. He was careful to maintain a respectful distance, though the shared saddle meant she could feel the steady strength of him at her back. "I've got a small ranch outside Cottonwood," he explained as they rode. "Nothing fancy, but I do all right. I'm headed to town for supplies." "You live alone?" Fiona asked, then blushed at her forwardness. "Just me and the cattle," he replied, "and Ajax here, of course." They rode in companionable silence for a while, Fiona gradually relaxing as the miles passed without incident. The vast Montana landscape stretched around them, rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, distant mountains blue on the horizon. "What will you do in Cottonwood?" Ross asked eventually. The question brought Fiona's fears rushing back. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "Find work, I suppose. I can cook and clean, mend clothes." "Town's small," Ross said thoughtfully. "Not many hiring, especially with the silver mine closing last year." Fiona's heart sank. She hadn't known about the mine. Cottonwood Springs had been her only plan. "There's a stagecoach that comes through once a week," Ross continued. "Could take you to Helena or even further if that's what you're wanting." "I don't have enough money for a long journey," Fiona confessed, embarrassed but seeing no point in pretense. Ross was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Blackett, please call me Fiona. I don't wish to be Mrs. Blackett anymore." "Fiona, then." His voice was steady behind her. "I've got a proposition for you, and I want you to know you can refuse with no hard feelings." She tensed slightly, waiting. "My ranch house has a spare room. Used to be my mother's before she passed last winter. You'd be welcome to stay there while you figure out your next steps." He hurried to add, "It's a respectable offer. You'd have your privacy, and I'd never presume, why would you help me?" Fiona interrupted, unable to believe someone would offer shelter without expecting something in return. Gerald had taught her that everything came with a price. "Because it's the right thing to do," Ross answered simply. "And because I know what it's like to need a safe place." They crested a small rise, and Cottonwood Springs came into view, a collection of wooden buildings straddling the stagecoach route. It was smaller than Fiona remembered from her few visits over the years. "You don't have to decide now," Ross said. "I'll take you to town first. There's a small hotel if you prefer that." Fiona weighed her options carefully. The hotel would quickly deplete her savings, and then what? The town looked half abandoned, unlikely to offer much work. This cowboy seemed decent, and his offer of a separate room suggested honorable intentions. "Your spare room," she said finally. "Just until I sort things out, I can earn my keep cooking, cleaning." "We'll work that out," Ross agreed as they rode into town. "But first, let's get some supplies and something for that eye." Cottonwood Springs consisted of one main street with a general store, saloon, small hotel, livery stable, and a few other establishments. As they dismounted in front of the general store, Fiona was acutely aware of curious glances from the few people on the street. A woman with a bruised face arriving with a man she wasn't married to would spark gossip in any small town. Inside the general store, an elderly man with spectacles greeted Ross warmly. "O'Malley, wasn't expecting you till next week." "Change of plans, Mr. Paulson," Ross replied, then introduced Fiona. "Mrs. Blackett here will be staying at my place for a while. She's my mother's cousin from back east." The lie surprised Fiona, but she understood its purpose immediately. It gave her a respectable reason to be at his ranch. "Any family of Sarah O'Malley is welcome in these parts," Mr. Paulson said kindly, though his eyes lingered on her bruised face. "What can I get for you folks today?" Ross purchased supplies methodically: flour, coffee, sugar, bacon, beans, and other staples. He added items Fiona suspected weren't on his original list: a bottle of witch hazel for her bruises, a small bottle of rose-scented soap, and a sturdy comb. When Fiona tried to contribute money for her items, Ross shook his head firmly. "You save that," he murmured. "You might need it later." His consideration touched her deeply. No one had looked out for her interests this way since her parents died when she was 18. As they left the store, Ross stopped at the post office, where he posted a letter and collected his mail. Fiona waited outside, nervous about being seen. Gerald had friends who traveled through Cottonwood occasionally, if word got back to him about where she was. "All set," Ross said, returning to her side. "Anything you need before we head to the ranch?" Fiona shook her head, eager to be away from curious eyes. The O'Malley Ranch lay 4 miles outside town, a modest spread with a small, well-built cabin, a barn, corral, and open grazing land stretching toward distant hills. A creek ran along one edge of the property, lined with cottonwoods that gave the town its name. It wasn't grand, but to Fiona's eyes, it looked like paradise compared to the grim farmhouse she'd fled. "It's not much," Ross said as he helped her down from Ajax, "but it's paid for and the water's good." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. A main room served as kitchen and living area, with a cast iron stove, a table with 4 chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the stone fireplace. 2 doors led off this main room. "That's my room," Ross said, pointing to one door, "and this will be yours." He opened the second door to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the creek. "It was my mother's," he explained. "I haven't changed anything since she passed." The room held the faint scent of lavender. On the dresser sat a silver-backed hairbrush and hand mirror, a Bible, and a small porcelain figurine of a bird. It was clean and welcoming. "It's lovely," Fiona said sincerely. "Your mother had good taste." A shadow crossed Ross's face. "She was a fine woman. Followed my father out here from Virginia after the war. Dad built this place, but she made it home." He cleared his throat. "I'll bring in the supplies and get some water heated so you can wash up. Make yourself comfortable." Left alone, Fiona set her small bundle on the bed and took a deep breath. The events of the day seemed surreal. That morning, she'd been a beaten wife. Now she was a runaway staying in a stranger's home. Yet for the first time in years, she felt something like hope. She unpacked her few possessions, arranging them neatly on a corner of the dresser. The contrast between her meager belongings and the comfortable furnishings of the room emphasized how little she'd been able to call her own in her marriage. A soft knock at the door announced Ross's return. He carried a steaming pitcher of water, a basin, and a clean towel. "Thought you might want to freshen up," he said, setting the items on the dresser. "Supper won't be fancy, but it'll be hot. Take your time." When he'd gone, Fiona poured the warm water into the basin and carefully washed her face, wincing as she touched the tender areas. The mirror revealed what she'd expected: a swollen left eye, a dark bruise forming on her cheekbone. She applied some witch hazel, grateful for its soothing effect. Changing into her clean dress, she combed her long auburn hair and tied it back with a ribbon. The simple act of grooming herself made her feel more human again, more like the woman she'd been before Gerald slowly crushed her spirit. When she emerged from the bedroom, the aroma of frying bacon filled the cabin. Ross stood at the stove, competently preparing a meal of bacon, beans, and biscuits. "Hope you don't mind simple fare," he said. "My cooking skills are limited." "It smells wonderful," Fiona assured him, moving to set the table without being asked. It felt natural to fall into domestic tasks. "I can take over the cooking tomorrow if you'd like." "No need to earn your keep just yet," Ross replied. "You've had a hard day. Rest first." They ate together at the table, the meal surprisingly good for a bachelor's cooking. Ross asked no questions about her marriage or her bruises, instead telling her about the ranch, his 30 head of cattle, the vegetable garden his mother had maintained that he was trying not to kill completely, the challenges and rewards of ranching life. As twilight descended, Ross lit a lantern and stoked the fire against the evening chill. "I rise early," he told her, "but don't feel you need to. Sleep as long as you need." "Thank you," Fiona said, the words inadequate for the kindness he'd shown, "for everything." Ross nodded, his expression gentle. "Everyone deserves a safe place, Fiona. Good night." In the privacy of her borrowed room, Fiona knelt beside the bed and prayed for the first time in years. She gave thanks for her escape, for the unexpected kindness of a stranger, and for the chance to begin again. As she drifted to sleep beneath the soft quilt, she realized she hadn't felt afraid since meeting Ross O'Malley. After years of constant fear, its absence was the most precious gift imaginable. Dawn broke clear and bright over the ranch. Fiona woke early despite Ross's assurance that she could sleep in. Years of rising before Gerald had trained her body to wake with the first light. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings. Then memory returned her escape, the kind cowboy, this sanctuary. She dressed quickly and stepped into the main room to find it empty, though the stove was warm and a pot of coffee simmered on it. Through the window, she could see Ross in the corral, working with a young horse. He moved with confidence, his strength tempered by patience as he guided the nervous animal. Fiona poured herself coffee and set about making breakfast. She found eggs in a small pantry and biscuit fixings among the supplies they'd purchased yesterday. By the time Ross came in, drawn by the smell of cooking, she had a hearty meal ready. "You didn't need to do this," he said, washing his hands in a basin by the door. "I wanted to," Fiona replied. "It feels good to be useful." They ate together, and Fiona found herself studying Ross when he wasn't looking. In the clear morning light, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or 31. His brown hair had sun-bleached streaks, his face was tanned from outdoor work, and laugh lines crinkled at the corners of his eyes. There was an air of quiet competence about him that she found reassuring. "What are your plans for today?" he asked, breaking into her thoughts. "I thought I might tend to your garden," she offered. "If that's all right." Ross smiled ruefully. "It could use a woman's touch. Ma had such a way with growing things. I've been trying to keep it going, but I'm afraid I'm better with cattle than cabbage." After breakfast, Ross showed her the garden, a generous plot behind the house that was struggling under his care, but still held promise. Rows of vegetables competed with encroaching weeds, but Fiona could see the good bones of the garden beneath the neglect. "I've got fencing to mend on the north pasture," Ross told her. "Will you be all right here alone?" Fiona nodded, already planning her attack on the weeds. "I'll be fine." As Ross rode away, Fiona surveyed her domain. The garden would be good therapy, simple, honest work that would allow her mind and heart to process all that had happened. She found tools in a small shed and set to work. By midday, she'd cleared weeds from around the struggling tomato plants, green beans, and carrots. Sweat dampened her dress, and dirt covered her hands, but the physical labor felt purifying. Each weed uprooted seemed to represent another piece of her old life discarded. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't hear the approaching rider until he called out. Startled, Fiona looked up to see a man on horseback at the edge of the garden. For one terrifying moment, she thought Gerald had found her, but this man was a stranger, older, with gray in his beard and a badge pinned to his vest. The local sheriff, she realized. "Morning, madam," he said, tipping his hat. "I'm Sheriff Tom Caldwell. Would Ross O'Malley be around?" "He's mending fences in the north pasture," Fiona replied, standing and brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'm Fiona Blackett, his mother's cousin." The sheriff's eyes lingered on her bruised face, but he merely nodded. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Blackett. Just wanted to let Ross know we caught those cattle rustlers that hit the Peterson place last month. Thought he'd want to know." "I'll tell him when he returns," Fiona promised. The sheriff hesitated. "Don't mean to pry, but you all right, madam? That's a nasty bruise you're sporting." Fiona touched her face self-consciously. "An accident. I'm quite all right, thank you." Sheriff Caldwell didn't look convinced, but he nodded. "Well, welcome to Cottonwood. If you need anything, Sheriff's office is right next to the general store." After he'd ridden away, Fiona resumed her gardening, but her peace was disturbed. The sheriff's visit reminded her that she wasn't truly safe yet. Gerald might come looking for her. In the eyes of the law and society, she was still his wife, his property. If he found her, he could legally force her to return. When Ross returned for the midday meal, she told him about the sheriff's visit. "Tom's a good man," Ross assured her. "Known him for years." "He saw my face," Fiona said quietly. "Asked if I was all right." Ross regarded her steadily across the table. "Are you worried about your husband coming after you?" It was the first time he directly addressed her situation. Fiona appreciated that he didn't dance around the subject. "Yes," she admitted. "Gerald is a proud man. He won't like that I left." "Does he know you came this way?" Fiona shook her head. "I didn't tell him anything. Just left a note saying I wouldn't be back." Ross considered this. "Cottonwood's small, but it's not the only town within walking distance of your farm. He can't search everywhere. But if someone from town recognizes me and word gets back to him, then we'll deal with it," Ross said firmly. "This is my land. No one takes anyone from it against their will." His protectiveness warmed something inside Fiona that had been cold for a very long time. Still, she worried. "I don't want to bring trouble to your door. You've been too kind already." "Kindness isn't measured by convenience, Fiona. My mother taught me that." Ross pushed back from the table. "I need to finish that fencing before dark. Will you be all right here?" Fiona nodded, touched by his concern. "I'll have supper waiting when you return." The afternoon passed peacefully as Fiona continued her battle against the garden weeds. She also discovered a patch of herbs rosemary, thyme, and sage that had survived neglect due to their hardy nature. By late afternoon, she had harvested enough vegetables for a proper meal. Inside, she explored the kitchen more thoroughly, finding dried beans, preserved fruits, and home-canned vegetables from the previous year's harvest. Sarah O'Malley had been a provident woman. Using these stores and the fresh vegetables from the garden, Fiona prepared a hearty stew, corn bread, and stewed apples for dessert. Ross returned as the sun was setting, looking tired but satisfied with his day's work. His appreciation for the meal she'd prepared was genuine and warming. "Haven't eaten this well since Ma passed," he admitted, helping himself to seconds. "You've got a gift, Fiona." "It's nothing special," she demurred, though pleased by the compliment. "Just simple cooking." "Nothing simple about food that makes a man feel at home," Ross countered. After supper, they sat by the fire. Ross whittled a piece of wood while Fiona mended a shirt she'd found with a torn sleeve. The domestic scene struck her as surreal, so peaceful, so unlike the tense evenings with Gerald where any wrong word might trigger his rage. "Tell me about your mother," Fiona said, breaking the comfortable silence. "She seems to have been a remarkable woman." Ross's hands stilled on his carving. "She was, tough as nails but gentle too. Dad brought her out here as a new bride right after the war between the states. He'd fought for the Union. She was from Virginia. Her family disowned her for marrying a Yankee. He smiled at some memory. She never complained about the hardships, said she'd chosen love over comfort and never regretted it." "They sound like they had a good marriage," Fiona observed. "The best," Ross agreed. "When Dad died 10 years ago, I thought she might want to return east, but she said her home was here. Lived another 9 years, happy as could be tending her garden and bossing me around." His voice held fondness rather than bitterness. "And you never married?" Fiona asked, then blushed at her forwardness. Ross didn't seem offended. "Came close once. Emily Thornton, the schoolteacher. We courted for a year, but she couldn't abide ranch life. Went back to St. Louis," he shrugged. "It was for the best. She'd have been miserable here." "I'm sorry," Fiona said softly. "Don't be. Better to know before vows are spoken than after." He glanced at her meaningfully. "Some men would do well to recognize when a woman isn't happy." Fiona looked down at the mending in her lap. "Gerald wasn't always like he is now. When we first married, he was kind, or I thought he was. But the drought came and crops failed and he started drinking." She swallowed hard. "The first time he hit me was 3 years ago. I'd burned the bread." Ross's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, letting her speak. "After that, it didn't take much to set him off. A meal not ready on time, spending too much on lamp oil, not keeping the house clean enough." She touched her bruised cheek. "Yesterday it was because I'd let the fire go out overnight." "No reason justifies a man raising his hand to a woman," Ross said, his voice low and controlled. "None." Fiona nodded, grateful for his understanding. "I should have left sooner, I just didn't know where to go." "You're here now," Ross said simply. "That's what matters." The days fell into a rhythm at the O'Malley ranch. Fiona took charge of the household tasks, cooking meals, keeping the cabin clean, and resurrecting Sarah O'Malley's garden. Ross tended the cattle, repaired fences, and handled the business of running the ranch. They worked well together, establishing an easy companionship that surprised them both. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes Ross read aloud from one of his mother's books. Other times they just talked, sharing stories of their lives before they met. Fiona found herself laughing more than she had in years, rediscovering parts of herself that had been suppressed in her marriage. 2 weeks after her arrival, Ross suggested a trip to town for supplies. Fiona's bruises had faded enough that she felt comfortable appearing in public, though the thought of encountering someone who might know Gerald still made her nervous. Cottonwood Springs was busier than on her first visit. A cattle drive was passing through, filling the saloon with cowboys and the street with activity. At the general store, Mr. Paulson greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Blackett, good to see you looking so well. How are you finding our little corner of Montana?" "It's lovely," Fiona replied honestly. "Mr. O'Malley has been very kind. Sarah would be pleased to have family at the ranch again," the shopkeeper said, reinforcing their cover story. "Now, what can I get for you folks today?" As Ross listed their needs, the store's bell jangled and a well-dressed woman entered, accompanied by a girl of about 16. "Mrs. Foster," Mr. Paulson greeted them. "And Miss Abigail, what brings you to town today?" "Fabric for Abigail's new dress," Mrs. Foster replied, her gaze curious as it landed on Fiona. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Alina Foster. My husband owns the bank." Fiona introduced herself with the practiced story, aware of the woman's scrutiny. "Blackett," Mrs. Foster repeated. "Any relation to Gerald Blackett over in Wheatland County?" Fiona's heart nearly stopped. I don't believe so," she stammered. Mrs. Foster looked skeptical. "Strange coincidence, then. He was in town yesterday, putting up notices about his missing wife. Said she'd wandered off, not right in the head. There's a reward for information." The room seemed to tilt. Fiona gripped the counter for support. Gerald was looking for her, and he was close. Ross stepped smoothly to her side. "Fiona's been with us for nearly 3 weeks," he said firmly. "And she's perfectly sound of mind. Must be another Blackett family." Mrs. Foster didn't look convinced, but she nodded politely and moved to examine the fabric bolts with her daughter. The remainder of their shopping passed in a blur of anxiety for Fiona. As soon as they were outside, Ross guided her quickly to where Ajax was hitched. "We need to get you back to the ranch," he murmured. "I don't like the sound of this." They rode home in tense silence, Fiona's mind racing with fear. Gerald was in Cottonwood Springs. He was looking for her. And he was telling people she was mentally unstable, a story that would make it easy for him to claim her if found and difficult for her to seek help. Back at the ranch, Ross unloaded their supplies with unusual haste, his expression grim. When everything was put away, he faced her directly. "We need to talk about what happens if your husband finds you," he said. Fiona sank into a chair, the fear she'd been holding at bay washing over her. "He'll make me go back," she whispered, "and he'll punish me for leaving." Ross knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me, Fiona. I won't let that happen. This is my land. You're under my protection." "The law is on his side," she reminded him. "I'm his wife." "The law doesn't reach everywhere," Ross said firmly. "If he comes, we have options. I know people in Wyoming territory who would help, or we could head to California." "We?" Fiona echoed, startled by the implication. Ross's eyes held her steadily. "I wouldn't send you away alone." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day on the dusty road. Fiona saw in his eyes not just protection, but something deeper, something that made her heart race for reasons entirely separate from fear. "Why would you do that for me?" she asked softly. Ross's hands tightened gently around hers. "Because in these few weeks, you've brought life back to this home. Because you're brave and kind and deserving of better than what that man gave you." He hesitated, then added, "And because I think I'm falling in love with you, Fiona Blackett." The confession hung in the air between them. Fiona sat very still, overwhelmed by his words. It had been so long since anyone had valued her, respected her, let alone loved her. Could she trust these feelings? Could she trust herself? "You don't have to say anything," Ross continued when she remained silent. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing, but I wanted you to understand why I'm willing to leave everything if that's what it takes to keep you safe." Tears filled Fiona's eyes. "I don't want you to lose your home because of me." "A home is more than land and a building," Ross said gently. "Ma taught me that too." Fiona squeezed his hands, unable to speak past the emotion constricting her throat. Ross seemed to understand. He rose, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, the first time he had touched her in such a way. "We'll figure this out," he promised. "Together." That night, Fiona lay awake long after the house had gone quiet, her mind turning over the day's events. Gerald was searching for her. Ross loved her. Two truths that changed everything, and what of her own feelings? In the quiet darkness, she examined her heart. The peace she'd found at the ranch wasn't just about safety from Gerald's fists. It was about Ross, his quiet strength, his kindness, the way he treated her as an equal. In his presence, she felt herself unfurling like a flower long kept in shadow, finally feeling sunlight. Was that love? Or just gratitude? The question troubled her until she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Morning brought no clear answers, but a determination to face whatever came. As she prepared breakfast, Fiona resolved not to let fear rule her again. She had escaped once. She would not be recaptured without a fight. Ross entered the kitchen looking as though he'd slept as poorly as she had. They ate in companionable silence until a distant sound caught their attention, hoofbeats approaching. Ross moved to the window, his body tensing. Riders coming, 3 of them. Fiona's stomach clenched with dread. Gerald, can't tell yet. Ross crossed to the fireplace and took down his rifle. Stay inside. If there's trouble, go out the back and hide in the creek willows. I won't leave you to face him alone, Fiona protested. Ross's expression softened. Stubborn woman, he murmured, but there was admiration in his voice. The riders came into view, Sheriff Caldwell and 2 men Fiona didn't recognize. One was heavyset with a florid face, the other was slim and wiry. Neither was Gerald, but that brought little relief. They could easily be men hired to find her. Ross stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand but pointed downward. Fiona remained just inside the doorway, heart pounding. "Morning, Ross," Sheriff Caldwell called as they rode into the yard. "Hope we're not interrupting your breakfast." "Morning, Tom," Ross replied evenly. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted, followed by his companions. "Got some questions need answering. This here is Mr. Blackett and his brother from over Wheatland Way." Fiona's blood turned to ice. Not Gerald, but his older brother Silas and their cousin Ned. They would recognize her instantly. "Mr. O'Malley," Silas Blackett said, his tone falsely cordial. "We're looking for my brother's wife. She wandered off a couple weeks back, not right in the head, poor thing." "Sorry to hear that," Ross replied, his face revealing nothing. "What brings you to my place? Word is you brought a woman to town matching her description," Ned cut in. "Red hair, slim build, said she was your mother's cousin." "That would be Mrs. Blackett," Ross confirmed. "Fiona Blackett." "My mother's family from Virginia." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Fiona, you say? That's my brother's wife's name. Common name," Ross observed calmly. "But I assure you the lady staying with me is my mother's cousin." Sheriff Caldwell looked uncomfortable. "Thing is, Ross, Mrs. Foster was pretty certain the woman she saw was the same one from the notices, and the name being identical." "Would you like to meet her?" Ross asked, his voice level. "Judge for yourself." Fiona stepped forward before anyone could answer, moving to stand beside Ross on the porch. "I'm Fiona Blackett," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Silas's face registered shock, then anger. "That's her. That's Gerald's wife." "Never seen her before in my life," Ned added, confirming the lie. Sheriff Caldwell looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Madam, these men claim you're Gerald Blackett's wife, gone missing from Wheatland County." Fiona lifted her chin. "I was married to Gerald Blackett. But I didn't wander off, I left him, deliberately and permanently." "She's confused," Silas insisted. "Had a fall from a horse last month, hit her head, been saying strange things ever since. Gerald's beside himself with worry." "I'm perfectly sane," Fiona countered, anger giving her courage. "And I left because Gerald beats me. This bruise," she touched her healing face. "This was his parting gift." Silas snorted derisively. "Woman's hysterical, making up stories." Sheriff Caldwell looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Blackett, I understand you might be upset, but legally you're still a married woman. Your husband has rights to beat her," Ross interrupted, his voice hard. "Rights to terrorize her. What about her rights, Tom? The law's clear on this," the sheriff said apologetically. "A husband has the right to retrieve his wife. If she's being mistreated, she can file a complaint with the court. But what?" Ross demanded. "She goes back to a man who hurts her while the courts take their sweet time deciding if she deserves protection." Fiona placed a restraining hand on Ross's arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Sheriff Caldwell," she said steadily, "I am not going back to Gerald, ever. If you try to force me, I'll run again, and again. As many times as it takes." Silas stepped forward menacingly. "Now see here," Ross raised his rifle slightly, stopping him. "That's close enough." The standoff was broken by the sound of another horse approaching. All heads turned to see a woman riding into the yard, middle-aged, solidly built, with a no-nonsense expression and a doctor's bag tied to her saddle. "Morning, all," she called. "Someone want to tell me why there's a gathering at the O'Malley place before 8 in the morning, Doctor?" "Winters," Sheriff Caldwell acknowledged. "What brings you out here?" "Ross sent word he needed me to check on his cousin," the doctor replied, dismounting smoothly. That would be you, I presume, she asked, turning to Fiona. Fiona glanced at Ross in confusion. He hadn't mentioned sending for a doctor. Sent word yesterday, Ross explained quietly. After Mrs. Foster's comments in town, Dr. Winters approached Fiona, her keen eyes taking in the fading bruise. Let's step inside, Mrs. Blackett. I'd like to examine you. Now wait just a minute, Silas protested. This woman is my brother's wife. We're taking her home. The doctor turned a stern gaze on him. You'll wait until I've examined her. Sheriff, I trust you'll ensure these gentlemen behave themselves. Sheriff Caldwell nodded, looking relieved to have a reprieve from making an immediate decision. Inside, Dr. Winters closed the door and spoke quietly. Ross's note explained the situation. Let me see your injuries, past and present. Understanding dawned on Fiona. Ross had anticipated Gerald's family coming for her, and had summoned the one person whose testimony might help a doctor who could document abuse. Fiona unbuttoned the top of her dress, revealing yellowing bruises on her shoulders and the distinctive finger marks around her upper arms where Gerald had gripped her viciously. She showed the doctor a partially healed cut along her ribs from being shoved against the corner of a table, and a burn on her forearm from when Gerald had deliberately pressed her arm against a hot stove. Dr. Winters documented each injury with clinical efficiency, her face growing grimmer with each revelation. How long has this been going on? She asked. 3 years, Fiona replied. It got worse over time. When the examination was complete, Dr. Winters nodded decisively. Get dressed. I'm going to have a word with the sheriff. Outside, the doctor's authoritative voice carried clearly. Sheriff Caldwell, as a medical professional, I am documenting that this woman shows evidence of systematic physical abuse. Multiple injuries in various stages of healing, consistent with her account of ongoing mistreatment. Dr. Winters, I sympathize, but the law, the sheriff began. The law also prohibits excessive cruelty, Dr. Winters interrupted. I've treated enough victims to know the difference between accidents and deliberate harm. If you return this woman to her abuser and she dies from his care, you'll bear some responsibility. Fiona rejoined the men on the porch, standing tall despite her fear. Ross moved protectively to her side. There must be some legal recourse, Ross insisted. Divorce takes time and money, Sheriff Caldwell said, and a judge who's willing. Silas Blackett had been growing increasingly agitated. This is ridiculous. A wife belongs with her husband. Sheriff, do your duty. I've got another solution, a new voice called. All heads turned to see a man riding slowly into the yard. Fiona's heart stopped as she recognized Gerald Blackett. He looked exactly as she remembered, barrel-chested, with a thick mustache and cold eyes. He dismounted, his gaze fixed on Fiona with an expression that promised retribution. There's my poor confused wife, he said, his voice honey over poison. I've been so worried, darling. Ross stepped slightly in front of Fiona, his rifle still in hand. You're not welcome here, Blackett. Gerald ignored him, addressing the sheriff. As you can see, I've come for my wife myself. Surely there's no question of my rights now, Dr. Winters stepped forward. Mr. Blackett, I've examined your wife. She shows multiple signs of physical abuse. Gerald's face darkened momentarily before he forced a concerned expression. Fiona has always been clumsy. Falls, accidents, I've worried about her for years. It's why she needs my protection. These aren't accidents, Dr. Winters said firmly. With all respect, doctor, you weren't there, Gerald countered smoothly. My wife is prone to hysteria and confusion, tells wild tales. Ask anyone in Wheatland. Fiona trembled with a mixture of fear and rage. This was Gerald's true danger, his ability to appear reasonable while weaving lies. How many times had he convinced neighbors that her injuries were accidents, that she was unstable or clumsy? I'm not going with you, Gerald, she said, her voice shaking but determined. Not ever again. Gerald's false smile slipped. You have no choice, wife, the law is clear. Sheriff, Ross said quietly, I'd like a word with Mr. Blackett, privately. Sheriff Caldwell hesitated, then nodded. Keep it civil, O'Malley. Ross led Gerald several yards away, out of earshot but still visible. Fiona watched anxiously as the two men spoke, Gerald's face growing darker by the moment. After about 5 minutes they returned. Gerald looked furious but controlled. "It seems we have a misunderstanding," he announced stiffly. "My wife is welcome to stay here while she recovers her health. I'll return in 2 weeks to check on her progress." Fiona stared in disbelief. What had Ross said to change Gerald's mind so completely? Sheriff Caldwell looked relieved. "That sounds reasonable. Mrs. Blackett gets time to rest and no one has to make hasty decisions." Silas started to protest, but Gerald silenced him with a look. 2 weeks, he repeated, his eyes boring into Fiona's with unmistakable menace. "I'll be back." After Gerald, Silas, and Ned had ridden away, Sheriff Caldwell lingered. "Ross, what did you say to him?" Ross's expression was unreadable. "Just had a man-to-man talk." Dr. Winters snorted. "Well, whatever you said bought some time. Use it wisely." She turned to Fiona. "I'll file my report with the territorial judge. It might help if you need legal protection later." After the sheriff and doctor had departed, Fiona turned to Ross. "What did you say to Gerald? He would never willingly leave me here." Ross's jaw tightened. "I made him an offer. $2,000 if he agrees to divorce you quietly." Fiona gasped. 2,000 Ross, that's a fortune." "Your cattle, your savings, it's worth it," Ross said simply. "He won't keep his word," Fiona warned. "He'll take your money and still try to force me back." "I know," Ross agreed grimly, "but it buys us time. 2 weeks to make plans." "Plans for what?" Ross met her gaze steadily. "For whatever you want, Fiona. If you want to stay and fight legally, Dr. Winters's testimony might help. If you want to leave, go to California or Oregon, I'll take you. Or if you want to go alone, I'll give you enough money to start over somewhere Gerald can't find you." The enormity of his offer and what it would cost him left Fiona speechless. No one had ever put her needs first this way. "I won't let you sacrifice everything for me," she said finally. "It's my choice to make," Ross replied, "just like leaving Gerald was yours." That evening they sat by the fire as usual, but a new tension hung in the air. The confrontation had changed things between them, bringing their feelings and their predicament into sharper focus. "Tell me about California," Fiona said softly. "Have you been there?" Ross nodded. "Once when I was younger. Drove cattle to Sacramento. Its beautiful mountains, valleys, the ocean, a place where a person could start fresh." "Is that what you want, to leave Montana?" Ross studied the fire. "What I want is for you to be safe and happy, Fiona. If that means California, I'll go gladly. If it means staying here and fighting Gerald through the courts, I'll do that too." He paused, then added quietly, "What I don't want is for you to feel obligated to me because I offered help." Fiona understood what he wasn't saying. His declaration of love hung between them, unacknowledged since he'd spoken it. "Ross," she said carefully, "when Gerald came today, I was terrified. Not just of him, but of losing this," she gestured around the cabin, "losing what I've found here with you." He looked up, hope and uncertainty warring in his eyes. "I'm not sure I know what love is anymore," Fiona continued honestly. "Gerald said he loved me once, but it wasn't love, it was possession." She took a deep breath. "What I feel for you is different. It's trust and respect, and in something more that I'm afraid to name yet, but it's real, and it's growing stronger every day." Ross reached across the space between them, taking her hand. "That's enough for now," he said softly. "More than enough." They sat in companionable silence, hands linked, as the fire burned low. Whatever came in the next 2 weeks, Fiona knew one thing with certainty: she would not return to Gerald. With Ross beside her, she would find a way forward, whether that meant fighting through the courts, fleeing to California, or some other path not yet revealed. For the first time in years, the future held promise instead of dread. And that, she realized, was the greatest gift Ross had given her, not just shelter, but hope. The next morning brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. Over breakfast, Ross outlined his plan. "I've been thinking," he said, pouring coffee for them both. "Gerald won't honor any agreement. The moment he gets money in his hand, he'll try to take you back by force." Fiona nodded grimly. "He's never kept his word when breaking it suited him. So we need to be ready before the 2 weeks are up." Ross spread a map on the table between them. "We have 3 options as I see it. First, we could try for a legal divorce. Dr. Winters's testimony might help, especially if we can find a sympathetic judge. That could take months," Fiona pointed out, "and Gerald would fight it every step. Second option, we head west." Ross traced a route across the map. California's a long journey, but once there, Gerald would have a hard time finding you. We could start fresh. The thought was tempting a new life far from Gerald's reach, but the cost to Ross would be enormous. You'd give up your ranch, everything you've built. Land can be bought anywhere, Ross said simply. Some things are more important. Warmth spread through Fiona's chest at his words. What's the third option? Ross hesitated. It's less conventional. There's a settlement about 3 days' ride north of here in the foothills. Mostly miners and trappers, but there's a small community of women who have left difficult situations. They look out for each other. No questions asked, no men allowed except by invitation. A friend of my mother's lives there, Martha Reed. She'd take you in. A place just for women. Fiona had never heard of such a thing. It's not well known for obvious reasons, Ross explained, but it's been there for nearly a decade. Some women stay permanently, others just long enough to sort out their situations or learn a trade. And I'd be safe from Gerald. The settlement has its own security. Men who come uninvited tend to have accidents. Ross's expression suggested these weren't entirely natural mishaps, but it would mean we'd be separated, at least for a while. The thought of leaving Ross created an unexpected ache in Fiona's heart. In just a few weeks, he had become central to her sense of safety and happiness. You don't have to decide now, Ross assured her, seeing her distress. We have some time. But time was precisely what worried Fiona. Gerald won't wait 2 weeks. He'll be back sooner, probably with more men. Ross nodded grimly. I've thought of that too. I've sent word to some friends ranchers who owe me favors. They'll be stopping by in the next few days. Extra eyes and guns around the place. The casual mention of potential violence sent a chill through Fiona. I don't want anyone hurt because of me. With enough people here, there won't be a fight, Ross assured her. Gerald's a bully, not a fool. He won't take on half a dozen armed ranchers. Fiona wished she shared his confidence. Gerald's rage made him unpredictable, especially when his pride was wounded. And she had humiliated him by leaving. What about money? She asked. You mentioned paying Gerald $2,000. That's everything you have, isn't it? Ross hesitated, then nodded. Most of it. I've been saving to expand the herd, buy some adjacent land. But cattle prices are good right now. I can build back up. I can't let you do that, Fiona protested. You're not letting me do anything, Ross replied gently. I'm choosing to help someone I care about escape a dangerous situation. I'd do the same for any friend. But they both knew this was different. The feelings growing between them went beyond friendship, creating both possibility and complication. Over the next few days, Ross's friends began arriving as promised, first Bill Harker and his son Jimmy from the neighboring ranch, then 2 brothers named Peterson, whose cattle had recently been targeted by rustlers. Each brought supplies and bedrolls, setting up camp near the house with the casual air of men paying a social visit rather than forming a defensive perimeter. Fiona cooked for the growing group, finding unexpected comfort in the routine domestic task. The men treated her with respect, never mentioning her situation directly, but making it clear through small gestures and meaningful glances that they understood why they were there. On the 3rd night, as they sat around a fire outside after supper, Bill Harker addressed the situation directly. Ross tells us you're having some trouble with your husband, Mrs. Blackett, he said, his weathered face kind beneath his graying beard. Want you to know we don't hold with men who raise hands to women. You've got friends here. Fiona was touched by the simple declaration of support. Thank you, Mr. Harker. I appreciate all of you taking time away from your own ranches. Neighbors help neighbors, Jimmy Harker said firmly. That's how it works out here. The younger Peterson brother Mark, she thought his name was, nodded agreement. Besides, we owe Ross. He helped us track those rustlers last winter when nobody else would ride out in that blizzard. As the men exchanged stories about past challenges and mutual aid, Fiona glimpsed something she'd never experienced before: a community where people genuinely looked out for each other without expecting payment or advantage. It was so different from Wheatland County, where Gerald had systematically isolated her from potential allies. Ross sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders occasionally brushed. Each contact sent a small thrill through her, a reminder of the growing connection between them. When he smiled at something Bill said, the firelight caught the laugh lines around his eyes, and Fiona felt a surge of emotion that was becoming increasingly difficult to deny. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her after her disastrous marriage, but instead it felt like coming home after a long, difficult journey. Later, as the men settled into their bedrolls and Ross walked her to the cabin door, Fiona gathered her courage. "I've been thinking about the options you mentioned," she said softly. "If when we get through this situation with Gerald, I'd like to stay here with you." Her heart pounded as she added, "If that offer still stands." Ross's eyes widened, then softened with an emotion that made her breath catch. "It stands," he said, his voice husky, "for as long as you want it." They stood close in the moonlight, the attraction between them palpable. For a moment, Fiona thought he might kiss her. Instead, he gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers incredibly tender against her skin. "Good night, Fiona," he whispered. "Sleep well." Inside her room, Fiona pressed her fingers to the spot he had touched, her skin still tingling from the contact. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with joy instead of fear mornings, waking up beside someone who valued her. Evenings sharing the day's events, building a life together based on mutual respect and growing love. If only Gerald would let her go. The next morning dawned cloudy, a hint of rain on the horizon. Fiona rose early to prepare breakfast for the men. As she worked, she heard horses in the yard and looked out to see two more riders arriving women to her surprise. One was Dr. Winters, recognizable by her sturdy build and practical riding clothes. The other was a slender woman with silver-streaked dark hair, dressed similarly but with a rifle prominently displayed in her saddle holster. Ross greeted them warmly, helping Dr. Winters dismount while the other woman swung down easily on her own. He escorted them inside where Fiona was setting the table. "Fiona, you remember Dr. Winters," he said. "And this is Martha Reed, the friend I mentioned." Martha Reed studied Fiona with keen gray eyes, her assessment direct but not unkind. "Ross tells me you're in a difficult spot, Mrs. Blackett. Please call me Fiona," she replied, instantly liking the older woman's straightforward manner. "And yes, my husband isn't willing to let me go peacefully." "Men rarely are," Martha observed dryly. "They hate losing what they consider their property." Dr. Winters nodded agreement. "I've filed my report with Judge Wilson, but he's traveling the circuit, won't be back for at least 3 weeks. In the meantime, Martha and I thought we might offer another perspective on your situation." Over coffee, Martha explained about the women's settlement haven. She called it in more detail than Ross had provided. Founded by a group of widows after the war, it had evolved into a refuge for women escaping bad situations. "We've got about 30 women now," Martha said. "Some with children. We support ourselves by trading handcrafts, preserved foods, medicinal herbs. Some of the women eventually move on, start new lives elsewhere. Others stay permanently." "And men really can't find it?" Fiona asked skeptically. Martha smiled grimly. "Oh, they can find it, but they quickly learn it's healthier to leave it alone. We've had to be persuasive a few times." The glint in her eyes suggested persuasive might involve the rifle she carried so comfortably. "If you choose to come to Haven," Martha continued, "you'd be safe from your husband. But I should be clear, it's a hard life, especially in winter. Everyone works, everyone contributes. It's not a charity." "I'm not afraid of hard work," Fiona assured her. "I can vouch for that," Ross added. "She's single-handedly resurrected my mother's garden in just a few weeks." Martha nodded approval. "Good gardening skills are valuable, so is cooking from the smell of things." She glanced appreciatively at the biscuits Fiona had just removed from the oven. "The settlement is one option," Dr. Winters interjected, "but I've also been making inquiries about legal recourse. Divorce is difficult but not impossible, especially with documented abuse." "Gerald would never agree," Fiona said. "He might if the alternative was jail," Dr. Winters replied. "I've spoken with the territorial prosecutor. If you're willing to testify, there's a possibility of bringing criminal charges for assault." The prospect was both terrifying and tempting. To publicly accuse Gerald, to see him face consequences for his actions, Fiona had never imagined such a possibility. He'd be furious, she whispered. He'd be in jail, Dr. Winters corrected. At least temporarily, long enough for divorce proceedings to begin. Ross, who had been listening quietly, leaned forward. What are the chances of success? Dr. Winters grimaced. Honestly, not excellent. Courts tend to view marriage as private, but the laws are changing slowly, and Judge Wilson is more progressive than most. And if the case fails? Ross pressed. Then Gerald walks free, probably angrier than ever, Dr. Winters admitted. Which is why I suggested Martha come today. Having options is important. Fiona's mind whirled with possibilities and dangers. Legal action might free her permanently from Gerald, but at significant risk. Haven offered immediate safety but separation from Ross, and there was still the possibility of fleeing west, starting completely fresh. I need time to think, she said finally. Martha nodded, understanding. Of course, but not too much time. Your husband struck me as the type to act sooner rather than later. She reached into her saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in oilcloth. Meanwhile, keep this with you, just in case. Fiona unwrapped the package to find a small pistol, well-maintained and loaded. Do you know how to use it? Martha asked. Fiona shook her head. I'll teach her, Ross said quietly. After breakfast, while the other men tended to chores around the ranch, Ross took Fiona to a small clearing behind the barn. He showed her how to hold the pistol, how to aim, how to account for the recoil. Fiona found the weapon heavier than expected but not unmanageable. I pray you never need to use this, Ross said as she practiced aiming at a row of bottles he'd set up. But if Gerald comes at you and no one else is around, don't hesitate. Fiona nodded grimly, squeezing the trigger. The shot went wide, but the second one clipped the edge of a bottle. By the sixth attempt, she hit the center bottle squarely, sending glass shattering. Good, Ross approved. Again. They practiced until Fiona's arms ached, but her aim was consistent. As they walked back to the house, Ross's hand brushed hers, then caught it, their fingers intertwining naturally. It was the first time he had held her hand this way, and the simple contact felt profoundly intimate. Whatever you decide, Ross said softly, know that I'm with you. Haven, California, staying to fight, it's your choice, Fiona. I just want you to be safe and happy. Fiona squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words for his support. What would you choose if it were your decision? Ross considered the question seriously. I'd want to stay and fight, he admitted. This is my home, and running feels like letting Gerald win. His jaw tightened. But I've never faced what you have. I can't truly understand your fear. His honesty touched her deeply. Gerald had always presumed to know what was best for her, making decisions without consulting her wishes. Ross's respect for her agency was yet another reminder of how different he was. I don't want to run either, Fiona said slowly. But I'm afraid of what Gerald might do, not just to me, but to you and anyone who helps me. Fear is natural, Ross said. Courage isn't about not being afraid, it's about doing what's right despite the fear. As they neared the house, Fiona made her decision. I want to stay and fight, she said firmly. Legally, I mean, with Dr. Winters's help. Ross nodded, his expression a mixture of pride and concern. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Fiona replied, echoing something her father had often said. The decision made, they joined the others to discuss strategy. Dr. Winters suggested Fiona write a formal statement detailing Gerald's abuse, which could be filed with the territorial court. Martha offered to bring 2 women from Haven to serve as additional protection at the ranch, women with considerable skill with firearms, she assured them. The more people here, the less likely Gerald is to try something foolish, Bill Harker observed. Unless he brings more men, Mark Peterson countered. He might see our numbers and decide to match them. The possibility hung heavily in the air. Gerald had connections in Wheatland County, not friends exactly, but men who might help him for the right price or simply for the promise of trouble. We'll keep watches, Ross decided. 2 men awake at all times, rotating through the night. As the men worked out schedules, Dr. Winters drew Fiona aside. There's something else to consider, she said quietly. If you pursue legal action, the process will be public. Your experiences, your private suffering, all of it may be discussed openly in court. Fiona hadn't considered that aspect. The thought of strangers hearing about Gerald's abuse, of reliving those moments publicly, made her stomach clench. Is it necessary? She asked. For criminal charges, yes, Dr. Winters confirmed. For divorce, possibly less so, but still some disclosure would be required. She squeezed Fiona's arm gently. I don't say this to discourage you, but to prepare you. Knowing what's ahead makes it easier to face. Fiona appreciated the doctor's frankness. Too much of her life had been spent in denial, pretending things weren't as bad as they were. Clear-eyed honesty, however painful, was preferable. I understand, she said, and I still want to proceed. Dr. Winters nodded approval. Good. I'll ride to Helena tomorrow to speak with the prosecutor personally. The sooner we file charges, the better. That evening, after their visitors had departed with promises to return soon, Fiona sat on the porch watching the sunset. The beauty of the Montana landscape still took her breath away, the vast sky painted in shades of gold and crimson, the distant mountains blue-black against the horizon, the grasslands rippling like water in the evening breeze. Ross joined her, offering a cup of coffee laced with honey the way she preferred it. Penny for your thoughts. I was just thinking how beautiful it is here, Fiona replied. I never noticed the sunset much at Gerald's farm, too busy trying to get everything done before he came in for supper. Ross settled beside her on the porch step, close enough that their shoulders touched. My mother used to say that sunsets are God's way of reminding us that even the hardest days end in beauty if we're patient enough to wait for it. The sentiment resonated with Fiona. Her hard days with Gerald had ended, and now, despite the danger still looming, she found herself surrounded by beauty and kindness. Ross, she said softly, thank you for everything. Not just the shelter and protection, but for... She struggled to articulate the profound difference he had made in her life. For seeing you, Ross finished simply. The real you. Yes, Fiona whispered, emotion tightening her throat. For seeing me. In the fading light, she turned to look at him. His eyes held such warmth, such genuine caring, that something inside her that had been closed for years finally opened completely. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a question more than a demand. Ross remained perfectly still for a heartbeat, then responded with equal gentleness, his hand coming up to cradle her face with infinite care. When they parted, both were breathing unevenly. Ross rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I've wanted to do that since the day I found you on the road, he admitted, his voice husky. Why didn't you? Fiona asked, genuinely curious. Ross pulled back slightly to meet her gaze. Because you needed safety more than romance, because you were healing from Gerald's treatment. Because I wanted you to be sure of your own feelings, not just grateful for help. His consideration for her well-being, his respect for her emotional state, made Fiona's heart swell. This was what love should be: patient, respectful, kind. I am sure, she said softly. What I feel for you isn't gratitude, Ross. It's deeper than that. A smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features. Good, he murmured, leaning in to kiss her again. Because I'm fairly certain I'm in love with you, Fiona Blackett. The confession, spoken against her lips, filled Fiona with joy. And I with you, she whispered back. They might have continued, but the sound of approaching riders made them spring apart. Ross was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand, before Fiona had even registered where he'd retrieved it from. Inside, he ordered tersely. Fiona obeyed, though she paused at the door, Martha's pistol now in her hand. Through the gathering dusk, she could make out 3 riders approaching slowly. As they drew nearer, she recognized Bill Harker returning with fresh supplies, accompanied by his son. The third rider was a stranger, a woman, Fiona realized as she came into clearer view. Ross lowered his rifle, recognizing the Harkers. Evening, Bill. Jimmy? Ross, Bill acknowledged. Brought someone to meet Mrs. Blackett. This is Eliza Johnson. She's got a story you'll want to hear. The woman dismounted gracefully despite her obvious pregnancy. She was perhaps 30, with dark blonde hair and a face that would have been pretty if not for the haunted look in her eyes. Mrs. Blackett, she said, her voice soft but steady. I understand you're married to Gerald Blackett. Fiona tensed, instinctively wary. I am, though I've left him. Do you know Gerald? Eliza Johnson's smile held no humor. I was married to him first. The revelation stunned Fiona into momentary silence. Gerald had never mentioned a previous marriage. In fact, he'd explicitly told her he'd never found a woman worth marrying until her. "That's not possible," she said finally. "Gerald never, let me guess," Eliza interrupted gently. "He told you he'd never been married before, that you were special, different from other women. That you understood him in a way no one else ever had." Each word struck Fiona like a physical blow. They were almost exactly the phrases Gerald had used during their courtship. "How did you?" she began. "Because he said the same things to me," Eliza explained. "And probably to his wife before me, though I never met her." Ross had moved to Fiona's side, his expression thunderous. "Are you saying Gerald Blackett has multiple wives?" Eliza nodded grimly. "At least 3 that I know of, me, a woman named Catherine from Wyoming, and now Mrs. Blackett here." She rested a protective hand on her swollen belly. "When I heard there was another Mrs. Blackett in the area, I had to come, to warn you." "Come inside," Fiona said, finding her voice again. "This isn't a conversation for the yard." In the cabin's main room, Eliza told her story. She had married Gerald 5 years earlier in Wyoming territory. After 2 years of escalating abuse, a pattern Fiona recognized all too well, she had fled to her sister's home in Nebraska. Gerald had tracked her down, dragged her back, and beaten her so severely she'd miscarried their child. "I thought he would kill me," Eliza said, her voice hollow with remembered terror. "But my brother found us. He helped me escape again, this time to Montana. I've been living in Haven for the past year." "You never divorced?" Ross asked. Eliza shook her head. "I was too afraid to go through the courts. Gerald would have found me. So my marriage to Gerald," Fiona began, the implications dawning on her, "isn't legal," Eliza confirmed. "He's still married to me and possibly to Catherine as well if she's still alive." The revelation was dizzying. Fiona wasn't legally married, had never been legally married. The vows she had kept despite Gerald's cruelty had been meaningless. "Bigamy is a felony offense," Ross said, his expression brightening with sudden hope. 5 years minimum in territorial prison. Bill Harker nodded. "That's why I brought Eliza here when I heard her story in town. This changes everything." Indeed it did. If Gerald could be charged with bigamy, a crime much easier to prove than spousal abuse, he would be imprisoned. Fiona would be free without the need for a divorce because there had never been a valid marriage. "Would you be willing to testify?" Fiona asked Eliza. "To prove you're his legal wife," Eliza hesitated, fear crossing her face. "I'm afraid of what he might do if I come forward." "He'd be arrested immediately," Ross assured her. "Bigamy is taken seriously. He wouldn't get the chance to harm you." "And afterward," Eliza pressed, "prison terms end. By then, you could be anywhere," Bill suggested, "with a new name, a new life." The pregnant woman considered this, her hand still protectively covering her belly. "This baby deserves a father who isn't a monster," she said finally. "If testifying against Gerald helps ensure that, I'll do it." Relief washed over Fiona, followed quickly by anger. Gerald had deceived her in the most fundamental way possible, making a mockery of sacred vows. The years of abuse were bad enough, but this betrayal cut even deeper. "I'll ride for the sheriff first thing tomorrow," Ross decided. With Eliza's testimony and marriage certificate, there should be enough evidence for an immediate arrest warrant. "I'll go with you," Bill offered, "extra gun just in case." As the men discussed logistics, Fiona sat beside Eliza on the sofa. "How far along are you?" she asked gently. 7 months, Eliza replied, her expression softening as she looked down at her belly. "A boy, I think. He kicks like one. The father, a good man," Eliza said with the first genuine smile Fiona had seen from her. "A trapper who trades with Haven occasionally. We're to be married as soon as my situation with Gerald is resolved." She glanced at Ross, then back to Fiona with knowing eyes. "It seems we've both found better men the second time around." Fiona blushed but didn't deny the observation. "Ross is everything Gerald pretended to be. Kind, honest, respectful. Hold on to that," Eliza advised. "After what we've been through, it's easy to doubt all men, to see threats where there are none. But there are good men in this world, rare as they sometimes seem." The insight struck Fiona as profoundly wise. She had already noticed a tendency in herself to flinch at sudden movements, to brace for anger at small mistakes. Healing those instincts would take time, but recognizing them was a start. That night, after the others had settled in Eliza in Fiona's room, Fiona on a pallet by the fire, the men in their bedrolls outside Fiona found it hard to sleep. The day's revelations and the kiss she and Ross had shared kept her mind racing. She was not married, had never been legally married. The freedom this knowledge brought was exhilarating, though tinged with bitterness at having endured Gerald's abuse under false pretenses. But now a future she had barely dared to imagine seemed possible. Once Gerald was arrested, and with Eliza's testimony, his arrest seemed certain Fiona would be truly free. Free to stay in Montana, free to see where her feelings for Ross might lead, free to build a life of her own choosing. The thought was so sweet that she finally drifted into peaceful sleep, more hopeful than she had been in years. Dawn had barely broken when the sound of galloping horses jolted Fiona awake. Ross burst through the door, his expression grim. "Gerald's coming," he said without preamble. Jimmy just rode in from his watch post, counted 8 riders heavily armed about 3 miles out. Fiona's heart raced with fear, but she forced herself to remain calm. How did he know to come here? Must have had someone watching the ranch, Ross surmised, or following us in town. Bill Harker entered behind Ross, rifle in hand. "Jimmy says they're riding hard, 10 minutes, maybe less." "Wake Eliza," Ross instructed Fiona. "Get her somewhere safe, the root cellar behind the house. It's well hidden." As Fiona hurried to rouse the pregnant woman, she heard Ross and Bill discussing strategy. They had 5 men at the ranch, plus Ross. Against 8 riders, the odds weren't favorable. "We need to stall them," Ross was saying. "Keep them talking until Sheriff Caldwell arrives." "If he arrives," Bill said grimly. "No guarantee that boy I sent got through to town." Fiona helped Eliza to the root cellar, a small underground space accessed through a trapdoor behind the house, partially concealed by a woodpile. Inside was cool and dark, with shelves of preserved food lining the walls. "Stay here until someone comes for you," Fiona instructed. "No matter what you hear." Eliza gripped her hand. "You should hide too. Gerald will be furious," but Fiona shook her head. "I'm done hiding from him. Besides, they're here for me, not you. As long as Gerald doesn't know you're here, you're safer than anyone." Returning to the house, Fiona found Ross checking his rifle. The other men had taken positions around the property, the Peterson brothers near the barn, Bill and Jimmy Harker flanking the front approach, the final ranch hand covering the rear. "You should hide with Eliza," Ross said when he saw her. "No," Fiona replied firmly. "This is my fight too. Gerald is coming because of me." Before Ross could argue, the sound of approaching horses grew louder. He moved to the window, Fiona beside him. 8 riders came into view, Gerald at their head. Unlike the men she remembered from Wheatland County, these weren't farmers or townsfolk. They had the hard look of men familiar with violence, hired guns, most likely. "Last chance to hide," Ross murmured. Fiona squared her shoulders. "I'm staying." Ross nodded, respect in his eyes. "Stay behind me then, and if shooting starts, get down and stay down." They stepped onto the porch as Gerald and his men reined to a halt in the yard, Gerald's eyes fixed on Fiona with cold fury. "There's my wayward wife," he called, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Time to come home, Fiona." "This is my home now, Gerald," Fiona replied steadily. "And I was never legally your wife." Gerald's face darkened. "What lies has this man been telling you?" "No lies," Fiona countered. "I know about Eliza and Catherine. You're already married, Gerald. Our marriage was never valid." For a moment, genuine shock crossed Gerald's face, quickly replaced by calculated charm. "Darling, you're confused. I don't know any Eliza or Catherine. Whatever this man has told you, save your breath," Ross interrupted. "We have proof. Your legal wife is prepared to testify." Bigamy carries a minimum 5-year sentence in territorial prison. Gerald's false smile vanished. "You think you're clever, don't you, O'Malley? Turning my wife against me, making up stories." He gestured to the men flanking him. "But I've brought friends to help settle this matter." "So have I," Ross replied calmly, as Bill and Jimmy Harker stepped into view, rifles ready. The Peterson brothers emerged from the barn, similarly armed. The 2 groups faced each other across the yard, tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Fiona's hand slipped to her pocket, where Martha's pistol provided cold comfort. "You're outnumbered, Blackett," Ross observed, "and the sheriff's on his way. This ends one of two ways: you ride out now or you go to jail. Your choice." Gerald's expression was murderous. "You think I'm afraid of some small town sheriff, or a bunch of ranchers playing at being tough?" He drew his pistol, aiming it directly at Ross. "I'm taking my wife back. Anyone who interferes dies." Time seemed to slow as Fiona watched Gerald's finger tighten on the trigger. Without conscious thought, she stepped in front of Ross, her own pistol raised. "Put it down, Gerald," she ordered, her voice steadier than she felt. "It's over." Gerald's eyes widened in disbelief, then narrowed with rage. "You'd shoot me, your own husband." "You were never my husband," Fiona replied coldly. "Just my abuser. And yes, I'll shoot you if I have to." For a long, tense moment, they faced each other, Fiona with her small pistol, Gerald with his revolver. Around them, men on both sides had weapons raised, trigger fingers tensed, waiting for the first shot to start what would surely be a bloodbath. "Gerald Blackett," a new voice called from beyond the yard. "Drop your weapon. You're under arrest for bigamy and assault." Sheriff Caldwell rode into view, accompanied by 6 armed men wearing deputy badges. Dr. Winters and Martha Reed flanked him, both armed with rifles. Gerald hesitated, his eyes darting between the new arrivals and Fiona. For a terrible moment, Fiona thought he might shoot anyway, choosing violence over surrender. Then, with a vicious curse, he lowered his pistol. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Sheriff Caldwell contradicted, dismounting smoothly. "Gerald Blackett, you're under arrest for bigamy, fraud, and assault. Your legal wife has signed a sworn statement, and we have witnesses to your threats here today." He nodded to his deputies. "Take him and his men. Disarm them first." What followed was surprisingly anticlimactic. Gerald's hired guns, seeing themselves outmanned and outgunned, surrendered without resistance. Gerald himself fought briefly as deputies tried to handcuff him, but was quickly subdued. As they led him to a prison wagon that had been following the sheriff's group, Gerald's gaze found Fiona one last time. "You'll regret this," he promised, his voice venomous. "No matter where you go, I'll find you when I get out." "No, you won't," Martha Reed said, stepping forward. "Because if you come within 100 miles of this woman again, you'll answer to me and every woman at Haven. And we're not as constrained by the law as Sheriff Caldwell here." The threat, delivered in Martha's calm, matter-of-fact tone, seemed to unnerve Gerald more than the armed men surrounding him. For the first time, Fiona saw genuine fear cross his face before deputies forced him into the wagon. As the prison wagon and its escort rode away, Fiona felt her knees weaken. Ross caught her before she could fall, his strong arms steadying her. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." Dr. Winters approached, her practical manner a balm to Fiona's raw emotions. "Eliza?" She asked simply. "In the root cellar," Fiona answered. "She's fine, just shaken." While Jimmy Harker went to retrieve Eliza, Dr. Winters explained what had happened. "Your message reached us just as we were preparing to file charges anyway. Martha and I were already gathering a posse when your young man arrived. Gerald will stand trial in Helena," Sheriff Caldwell added, joining them. "With Eliza's testimony and marriage certificate, plus his actions here today, he's looking at a lengthy sentence." "And when he's released?" Fiona asked, remembering his threat. "He'll be strongly encouraged to seek opportunities elsewhere," the sheriff said with surprising firmness. "Montana Territory has little patience for men who abuse women. Judge Wilson is particularly unsympathetic to such cases." Relief washed over Fiona in waves. Gerald was gone. He would be imprisoned for years. She was truly free, not just from his physical presence, but from any legal ties. The future stretched before her, full of possibilities that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Ross's arm remained around her shoulders, a steady support as friends and neighbors congratulated them on the peaceful resolution. Through it all, Fiona was acutely aware of his presence, of the unspoken question between them. When the excitement had died down and their visitors began departing Eliza to Haven with Martha, where she would remain until testifying at Gerald's trial, the sheriff and his deputies back to town, The neighboring ranchers to their own properties, Ross and Fiona found themselves alone at last. They stood on the porch, watching the last riders disappear over the rise. The morning's confrontation seemed distant already, like a storm that had passed, leaving clearer skies behind. "What now?" Ross asked quietly, his hand finding hers. Fiona turned to face him, suddenly shy despite the kiss they had shared the previous evening. "That depends," she said carefully. "What are you offering?" Ross's eyes softened. "Everything," he said simply. "My heart, my home, my future. Whatever you want, Fiona, for as long as you want it." "And if what I want is you," she whispered, "a life here together," his smile was like sunrise after the longest night, "then that's what you'll have." He cupped her face gently, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek where bruises had finally faded completely. "I love you, Fiona. I think I started falling the moment I saw you on that dusty road, looking so brave despite everything." "I love you too," Fiona replied, the words coming easily now that fear no longer shadowed her heart. "You showed me what love really means: respect, kindness, partnership." Ross leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that promised all those things and more. When they parted, his expression was tender but serious. "I want to do this right," he said. "Court you properly, the way you deserve, no rush, no pressure." Fiona smiled at his consideration. "I'd like that, but not too long a courtship," she added with newfound boldness. "I've waited long enough for happiness." "How does a month sound?" Ross suggested, his eyes twinkling. "Just enough time for the roses in the garden to bloom for your bouquet." "Perfect," Fiona agreed, rising on tiptoes to kiss him again. As they stood together in the clear Montana sunshine, arms entwined, Fiona marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From a desperate escape on a dusty road to finding love and safety in a cowboy's arms, it was a path she could never have imagined when she fled Gerald's house that fateful morning. The future would hold challenges, she knew. Gerald's threats from the prison wagon had been real, and rebuilding a life after abuse was never simple. But with Ross beside her and friends like Martha, Dr. Winters, and the neighboring ranchers supporting them, Fiona faced that future with hope instead of fear. And in the end, that was the greatest freedom of all. 1 month later, Fiona Blackett became Fiona O'Malley in a simple ceremony in the garden she had lovingly restored. Judge Wilson himself performed the service, having ridden from Helena specifically for the occasion after presiding over Gerald's trial. The bigamy charges had resulted in an 8-year sentence, with additional years for assault and making threats against an officer of the court when Gerald had lost his temper during proceedings. Martha Reed stood as Fiona's witness, while Bill Harker supported Ross. Dr. Winters, the Peterson brothers, Jimmy Harker, and half the town of Cottonwood Springs attended, along with several women from Haven who had become Fiona's friends. As Judge Wilson pronounced them husband and wife, Ross looked at Fiona with such love that she felt her heart might burst. When he kissed her, sealing their vows, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," Ross whispered against her lips. And Fiona, surrounded by flowers she had planted, and people who genuinely cared for her, knew that she had finally found what she'd been seeking that desperate day on the dusty road: not just shelter, but a true home where love and respect formed the foundation of every day. The life they built together over the following years exceeded even her brightest hopes. The ranch prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle and even some horses that Ross bred and trained. Fiona's garden became famous throughout the county, providing not just food for their table but medicinal herbs that she learned to prepare under Dr. Winters's tutelage. 2 years after their wedding, Fiona gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Sarah after Ross's mother. A son, William, followed 2 years later. Both children grew strong and happy in the loving home their parents had created, never knowing the fear that had marked Fiona's first marriage. Sometimes, on summer evenings, Ross and Fiona would sit on the porch watching their children play in the yard, where once they had faced down Gerald and his men. On those occasions, Ross would take Fiona's hand, pressing a kiss to her palm with the same tenderness he had shown that first day when he found her on the road. "Any regrets?" he would ask. And Fiona, looking at the life they had built from the ashes of her past, would smile and answer truthfully, "Not a single one." For a woman who had once found the courage to leave her husband's house forever, finding a cowboy who opened his arms and promised shelter had been only the beginning of a journey to love, healing, and the happiness she deserved.